Welcome to the afternoon session on gene therapy. My name is Joe Pantginis, head of biotech research at ROTH Capital Partners. Very happy that the Alliance has put this panel together, and ROTH is very pleased to be an annual sponsor of this event. And again, thank you. Gene therapy certainly is a roller coaster sector over the last decade or so, coming from a very taboo space back in the late 1990s, of course, with the death of Jesse Gelsinger, led to, the flatlining of the space for many years after that. And all of a sudden, we're back in the limelight with new technologies, new clinical data finally that has brought the space into the here and now and here to stay type of sector. This is certainly evidenced by significant funds flow into the sector and technological approaches. We hope to address many of the challenges and hurdles the space has overcome here today, and why we certainly look to be in a different era. I personally have an invested idea into the space based on my background, and looking at the ups and downs of this space. Having been trained as a retrovirologist back in the day, I had to go through the various, pushback you would get with vectors, and knowing that retroviruses actually do cause cancer. I mean, you had the basic premise that a retrovirus can cause cancer up to 200 kilobases, away from where it would integrate into the genome. And of course, there were some incidences of tumors in children to show that, but there have been many, many advances into the field, especially with the lentiviral vectors. So with that brief intro, I would love to have the panel introduce themselves, and then we can dive in.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Adam Bristol, and I'm a co-founder and a managing director at Aquilo Capital. We're a life science investment fund based in San Francisco, California. We are a public markets-focused fund, so we really focus on publicly traded companies, very fundamentally oriented. That is, we're not traders in a space that tends to be dominated by the catalyst-driven traders. My personal background's in neuroscience, so I did a Ph.D. and postdoc in neuroscience before joining the professional investment field in 2007.
Hi, I am Bogosian. I'm Chief Investment Officer of Daphne Capital Management. We are an investment fund in Los Angeles. We have been investing in the life science sector, biotech and medical devices for the last 16 years. And very similar, we are a fundamental group focusing on the sector. And my own background is I have a Ph.D. in biomedical engineering, and I have worked in the industry, and later I worked as a sell-side analyst for a number of years, part of it at ROTH Capital before Joe. And I've been at the firm now for 13 years.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me. My name is Daniel Krizek. I am an investor from Brookside Capital, which is a fund based in Boston. We are primarily a public-focused fund, but we also invest privately. So I focus on healthcare, primarily biotech. I've been investing across the gene therapy space for past couple of years. Until today, I think I've invested into 7 companies that could be classified as gene therapy companies, mostly privately, past 3 or 4 years or so.
Hi, everyone. I'm Parmar. I'm a managing partner at 5AM Ventures. We're an early stage venture capital firm focused exclusively on the life sciences. And we've been doing this for 13 years as a firm. I joined the firm 5 years ago. And our philosophy is to not just make investments, but actually be very active in our investments. And it's why we like to be focused on the early stages. It's where we feel we can add the most value in helping building strategies, building companies, and building teams. So we will often play interim management roles in companies as they're getting off the ground. We've made one publicly announced investment in gene therapy 2.5 years ago in the Series A of Audentes Therapeutics. We are incubating another company and are looking at a third new investment in the space as well.
Great, thanks for that. So as I alluded to in the introduction, obviously we're in the stage now where we're seeing real clinical data come out, the real potential for commercialization, from Bluebird, Unicure. We also have potential transformative therapies that Novartis alluded to yesterday with their collaboration with Genvec. They have a phase 1 with hearing loss. I actually think it's quite rare for a big pharma to mention such an early stage product, but they mentioned that it could be really transformative if you see some efficacy. So, what is the difference between today's environment and where we were in the mid-1990s, and what do you think have been the drivers in your eyes for this?
Sure. So in the mid-1990s, I was in graduate school. So, like most public investors, it takes us a while, and we have to get up to speed on things, and especially in a forum like this where I'm speaking with people who have been in this field for a long time, are far more, much more domain experts than I am. I have to be, with some trepidation I start to talk about it. But I started in anticipation of the panel looking back, and if you were to take someone from the mid to late 90s and then plop them in 2015, I was trying to think, what would they see different and what would they see that look the same? The things they would see the same is there's actually a few companies that are still around, that are still working hard, and so I think that would be familiar to them. But I think a lot of the things that they would see that would be different are understanding of the genetic basis of a lot of diseases, which open up new vistas. They would obviously see some of the tremendous enabling work that's gone on in various facets of gene therapy, obviously in vector technology, delivery, and I think things behind the scene too in terms of bioprocessing and manufacturing and scale up, although those things, there's still some innovation to be had there. So in many ways, I think that the public markets, and this is really my perspective, we're actually pretty dumb and reactionary. So, we tend to get things, only when they're at the kind of clinical stage and there's something that really captures our attention, for the things that kind of percolate, and especially during that period where it was the trough of disillusionment, when the thought that it was a replicating virus was too dangerous or risky to put in a patient unless they were really desperately ill. I think public markets were missing a lot of the innovation that was happening in academia and in the venture community that really should be lauded for their continuing work in this area. But clearly, obviously, there's been a lot of what I see the biggest change, obviously, some of the enabling technologies that the public markets are only now starting to become aware of. I don't know if you have sort of different views.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I have to say that it was mid-1990s, in 1996, that some of you may remember the company Avigen. It was the first, I think, gene therapy company that went public with focusing on AAV, adeno-associated virus vector. And I was actually the biotech analyst on that deal. At the time, the way we positioned the company was that there were a few gene therapy companies that had viral vectors, but they were not safe. You mentioned the retroviruses, and also the adenovirus had some issues. And then we had some companies like Vical here that had the DNA-based, the non-viral vector systems, but they were not very efficacious. And the way we positioned Avigen, which did well until some issues did arise, was that it's a company that has the efficacy of viral vectors but the safety of non-viral vectors. And the company eventually had issues. I think part of it was the longevity of the effect that we have seen has been a major issue in this field. But I'm happy to see that actually now most of the gene therapy, or many of the gene therapy companies, are using the AAV vector. But I think what has happened is that the vector has been optimized and the gene cassette has been optimized in terms of how you put the regulatory regions there and how you try to control the gene so that it doesn't get shut off after a short period of time. And to your point, there are now a number of gene therapy companies. I think Blue has shown very long 2 years or more now data that in thalassemia that basically patients are benefiting from gene therapy. So the premise has always been there, and it's a very exciting premise, of course, that the idea that you could cure somebody by just putting the gene that the patient is lacking. That's a very strong and very attractive premise, but that has also made the field difficult because you're putting something that you cannot take out. So if something goes wrong, it's irreversible. But with all the advances in the vector technology, in the better identifying the gene, the regulatory regions, I think now we are seeing some very promising drugs being developed. So.
Yep. So for me, 1999 versus 2015, there are two key differences, and some of them were already mentioned, right? Number one is the development of a better vector technology, and number two is we are now actually generating real clinical data that shows that gene therapy works, right? So on the first one, back in 1999, when Jesse Gelsinger died, we were using adenoviruses, which are integrating. They can cause insertion and mutagenesis. They're a little bit less predictable. There's immune responses, etc., right? Since then, we've developed the AAVs, which are obviously much safer to use, or it seems like they're much safer to use, much more predictable, mostly don't integrate, so there's no risk of longer term kind of issues, and still have capacity, 4.7 kilobases to go after about 80% of all the monogenic diseases, right? So the vector technology has had a giant leap between 99 and let's say and today. And number two, because of this AAV vector development, there were dozens and dozens of clinical trials started, and we've seen some promising results since then. So for example, some of the initial successful trials were in hemophilia B, right, which started in 2005, 6, 7, and now we're in 2015, and some of these patients with hemophilia B are still generating factor 9 after 5+ years. So that's really interesting result, right? Just on this past Monday, Spark Therapeutics, one of our investments, had positive phase 3 data in LCA2, Leber congenital amaurosis, which is actually the first ever phase 3 trial in gene therapy that was double-blind, placebo-controlled, randomized, right? And it hit the primary endpoint. So that's the first ever proof that gene therapy actually works, right? So we are generating all this positive data. Bluebird, as you mentioned, has been generating positive data in beta thal and sickle cell disease. That's a different technology. That's not AAV. That's obviously lentivirus, but still shows you that we have all these different diseases where we have been generating very promising clinical data. So that's what attracted a lot of capital recently, I would say past 2 years. And of course, there's all these new companies that are starting because of the AAV technology and because of the capital. So past 2 years, you can actually see an emergence of 30 plus companies based on AAV going after various diseases, neurology, metabolic, etc. So that we are in a renaissance, I would say, of gene therapy now.
Not a ton to add, honestly. I mean, we led an offsite on gene therapy back in 2011, and it was actually the fall of 2011, 4 years ago, primarily on AAV because we were seeing exactly this, the early data, not the Spark data, but the early data in RP65 deficient congenital blindness, and the other data in hemophilia B coming out of London. That, in our view, those were translational medicine stories because, especially in the liver, that was an iterative process. The AAV2 vector didn't quite work. The same experiment, actually hard to explain why the AAV8, hard to predict why the AAV8 was really going to be much better, but that vector ended up working well. So just an iterative story to finally keep going back into patients. The safety was looking really good at that point. I think it was in several dozens of patients with no really serious adverse events. So from our perspective, it's really came down to clinical data. I think there's also an appreciation for a fundamental belief, and there's more interest in rare diseases as well in the past number of years, and so I think public markets have seen those stories can create a lot of value, and with many of these genetic diseases that gene therapy is going to be addressing, those are monogenic rare diseases. So I think there's a general comfort around that I'd say 10 years ago or in 99, it was much less of a popular story to build value on those kinds of stories as well.
It's a good point. And, you know, in the early, I guess, what Ceridase was approved in 91-ish or early 90s, but you didn't have Fabrazyme until early 2000s. Obviously, Soliris was a 2010, 2011. So from at least from the investor perspective, the value that can be created with some of these orphan diseases, we didn't really quite have the playbook yet in 2011, in the mid-90s. You know, I'm curious, Daniel, with the Spark story. So RPE65 gene, you had some of the things that I've been thinking about is it's great to have great vector technology, but you really need sort of if you have a great hammer, you kind of need the nail, or I'm mixing metaphors. But the point I want to say is you've got to clone and sequence, sequence and clone the disease-related gene, then you can probably have the opportunity to make a great animal model, and then you probably have the vector technology that can help to do some of the in vivo proof of concept work. And so there are even a lot of like enabling bricks to the foundation that happen, even before we even get to some of these interesting things in human and clinical data. And so that's where I see some of the, again, from my vantage point of just trying to, like most public investors, trying to get up to speed on a lot of these things and having not lived it for 20 years, it seems like a lot of these pieces were put into place over the last 15 years to enable, some of these great advances we're having now. And there are probably a lot more of them. It's true, just as both you said, we're seeing so much activity, company formation, being well capitalized. But then the follow-up question, of course, is there's also the haves and the have-nots, even within the public markets, and I'll sort of turn it back over to our moderator for that.
And you make a good point. A couple of you made the good transition to talk about these genetic disorders, and if you just look at the eye as an example with Spark, AGTC, even Oxford Biomedica, they're looking at very specific genetic disorders that monogenic diseases especially. Something's missing, you're going to replace it. And then you have, of course, hindsight's 2020, when you look at something like what happened with Celadon, they were looking with a single gene to be able to address heart failure, which is a massively multifactorial disease. So you also have to have a very significant understanding of the underlying disorder. So with that said, what do you think have been the key technological breakthroughs that have kept you interested in the space, and the clinical insights, again, that have kept you really interested?
I could jump, but I don't want to dominate.
We'll start at that end since we're not going to keep going.
To be continued to be excited about this. So back in 2011, we set out our strategy, which was really focused on AAV, not on the ex vivo type gene therapies at that time, just because we felt the clinical data was there, the CMC was something we could sort of stomach as well. But one fundamental thesis was only to go after monogenic diseases, because this stuff is complicated enough. We did not want to be dealing with biological risk at all. And so I'd say for the moment, we're now, there's been a lot of advances, but I would say our comfort would really remain only to be in the monogenic disease space and not really go after very complex diseases. I'd say because we're early stage investors, we're thinking fairly long term. So we're incubating something right now, we're looking at something else. We're thinking about where this field's going to go, right? There are a number of well-known companies that we all know about that have pretty established vectors. They have, large financings and large amount of capital under their belt, and they're really in development mode and taking these therapies into the clinic. But we're thinking about what the field's going to need in the future. And so what we're looking at now is not the next dimension, really. It's really, we're thinking about, what's going to supersede the technologies that are there today, what's going to address this issue of pre-existing immunity, what's going to address the kinds of genetic diseases that these technologies cannot do robustly. And so that's the kind of differentiation. It needs to be pretty differentiated at this point as an early stage investor, so that my fellow investors can be looking at them and say, yeah, this is much better and very different than where these companies were 3 years ago.
I would definitely agree that monogenic diseases are the obvious target to go after right now, because it's so much potentially easier and more predictable, right? As we saw with Celadon versus what we saw with Spark, for example. When you look at all the diseases that humans get, there's about 6,000 of them, and about 5,000 of them are actually genetic, right? And out of these 5,000, we could technically go after about 80% of them with gene therapy. Now the problem is most of these 5,000 diseases are fairly rare, and if you take the top 10 or top 20, they're already rare, and the remainder are super rare. So how to go after that's going to be a challenge. The low-hanging fruit, the top 50 or so diseases will be probably taken fairly soon if it's not taken already, and it's going to be a question what to do later. But there's still a lot of interesting targets, so there's probably, I would expect more companies to appear, and the current companies that are out there will probably be developing fairly rich pipelines, I would expect. So.
I think everybody talked about monogenic, but I do agree, not only for gene therapy, but even other fields like antisense with ISIS. Their first drugs, they failed. Not because of the technology per se, but the issue was also that they were going after targets who were not validated. And, if you don't have a target that, it works, even if the technology works, you're just not getting anywhere. So if you give a gene that is not exactly addressing the underlying disease, you're not able to cure it with gene therapy. I think we saw it with avalanche to some degree also. So with monogenic, I fully agree with that. And most of the monogenic diseases are not very large diseases. I think by and large, all of them are rare diseases. So at the beginning, there was this crowded market going after thalassemia, going after maybe sickle cell to some degree. I don't know how much was focused on that one. But now, yes, in the ophthalmic field, there is a lot of rare diseases that the companies are going after. And obviously, eye is a site that is immunocompromised, immunoprivileged. So it's a good site to go. You're not worried about immunogenicity there. And I think also, beyond the typical gene therapy that we see right now for monogenic diseases, the whole CAR-T area for cancer, I mean, in a way, you're doing it ex vivo, so you take the cells out, but you treat it with genes for T-cell activation, and in majority of cases, CD19. So in a way, that's another whole frontier of gene therapy that it's having some very interesting results, especially in hematological cancer. So I think those are all, the technologies that we focus on and we pursue. And at the end of it, we are very data-driven, so we go by the data and not just by the logic that something should work, because we have all learned that in this business, sometimes you think it should work and it doesn't. But there has been a lot of interesting data in the gene therapy sector and CAR-T that makes us all very excited. And both ex vivo and in vivo, direct and indirect. So,
I mean, one thing I would add is, as an early stage investor, we don't like to think of ourselves as beholden to the public markets to build value and build companies, because we're thinking long term, and where the markets are today are frankly really irrelevant to where companies are going to be 5, 6 years from now if they're getting off the ground right now. But one thing that's encouraging to me, if you look at the current companies out there that we all know about that are looking towards getting to that public market stage, or recently did, it's hard. They're all building substantial scale. They're making very substantial investments today. Hard to imagine financing those privately to get to where they're really hoping to be. So their one is fairly, I mean, not entirely, but somewhat beholden to public markets, in the absence of the fact that the big pharma companies, they're just starting to sort of do deals. We haven't seen a big M&A yet in gene therapy, obviously, but I think we're quite optimistic that the big companies, they're getting more and more familiar. They're getting some of these academics engaged, and Biogen did the deal with AGTC, and I think we're going to see more of that. And that'll, again, I think from an early stage VC perspective, it's nice. It enables companies, I think, to access expertise in different ways, strike different types of partnerships, and not just have to raise tons of money to get anywhere. Right now, the manufacturing, as we all know, there's a lot of effort that needs to go into that, and everyone needs to just figure that out, and that just requires a lot of capital, which limits your flexibility in how you can create value, I think. But I think it's going to be much more rich in diversity moving forward as more, not just investors, but also the big partners that hopefully will step in and get very involved in commercializing these.
I'd like to be a bit of a contrarian about the monogenic diseases, though. Just as a thought experiment. What we like about monogenic diseases is that it feels, and it is true, that you can connect the dots between kind of the disease mechanism, the etiology of disease, the pathology, and then obviously the clinical, sort of manifestation of it.
Yeah.
But that doesn't it seems to me that doesn't necessarily have to be exclusive to a monogenic disease, that even if a disease is driven by an environmental insult or some other sort of process, that you couldn't find a link so strong that intervention at that link, you could still have an impact with some sort of transgene or other sort of approach. So maybe I just don't have the war wounds of sort of living through it, but I kind of feel like, obviously there's area of neurodegenerative disease and myocardial infarction and cardiovascular, and so there are areas where maybe that understanding is not so crisp yet to connect those dots, but theoretically I hope, and that's probably the hope of most people in this room, that we can ultimately get there too. So I don't want us to sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater, and all we're going to do is just focus on these ultra rare diseases and leave everybody else kind of outside looking in. But that's just that's more of kind of a thought experiment. I understand what are some of the more practical lower hanging fruit today. So
that's a good point.
I 100% agree with that. I mean, eventually there is no reason that if you can treat somebody with a protein, there is no reason you cannot treat them with a gene. So it's just that, especially in early days, if you don't know whether the gene is doing what it's doing, and the technology still is not 100% proven, when the drug doesn't work, you don't know who to blame.
That's true.
And I think when you know the gene is, exactly what the gene is supposed to do, if the technology doesn't work, then you know at least where to look at. So, but in the longer term, I think after monogenic, it's wide open.
It's a good point, Adam. I'm not to speak from two sides of my mouth, but I mean we're looking at one thing, right now, and the idea as we think about constructing the pipeline is actually to provide, to create a bit of a mix of a couple of very crisp and clear monogenic disease, programs, but a slightly higher risk, higher reward, bigger commercial opportunity, because I don't think we really need to completely leave those on the table.
And listen, I'll talk out of the other side of my mouth too, as a public market investor, my job is to try to mitigate as many sources of risk as possible. So often, like most, I'm probably looking for great, compelling data before I press the buy button. And so, I'm not going to be, I give a huge amount of credit to you guys in the early, company formation. You guys very progressive and visionary and looking down the road, where us in the public market, far more reactionary, far more kind of clinical data driven in most cases, and they just kind of pile in. But it just seemed that theoretically that there should be a lot of opportunity too, and hopefully there are companies that are, you can get the right tropism, kind of the right cell types, and the right duration of expression and controlled expression.
So to looking at your comment as clinical data being the ultimate driver, maybe I'll just quick poll the initial part of my question about, the key technological breakthroughs. So clinical data is the driver for you guys as you look at your investment options. Is it fair or unfair to say that you right now are agnostic as to the treatment approach, type of vector, for example, AAV, adeno, lentiviral, what have you, and right now you're just focused on data? So fair or unfair?
Pretty fair, that is, I think we're slow consumers of data. We have slow metabolism. We're trying to understand these things. I think we can try to get up to speed and understand some of the assets and liabilities of sort of different approaches. They all have their pros and cons, but there's probably Yeah, I think we'd be very data-driven, trying to understand, given the data set we have today, be it preclinical or clinical, my job is to make a risk-adjusted investment decision, and if the data is it's like we kind of did the panel yesterday with the payers, and it was saying they need, 10 years of safety data or something like that, or the outcomes data, and I'm thinking, good grief, we'll wait till the cows come home, and so I think we're very much kind of taking the data we have, because that's the opportunity for us, and so I think we'd be judging it on that, so I think we're fairly agnostic that way. I don't know.
I mean, let's say we have obviously seen nice long-term data with lentivirus. So, obviously AAV is not the only vector, but I think by and large, retrovirus and also adenovirus have had its issues. So I think right now the field seems to be more around the AAV and lenti. Now with lenti, you have to do it outside of the body, so it has its own issue. But on the other hand, if eventually you get a much better duration out of that, maybe that's fine. So if another vector comes and has great data, obviously we are very open to that. But I think so far these are the two vectors that we have seen most promise with. So maybe you find a new company with a new vector since you work much earlier stage.
So I mean, to be honest, I'd like AAV vectors to succeed, since I'm one of the largest shareholders of Regenix Bio, which owns the IP across the AAVs. But generally your statement is fair. Yes, of course we're agnostic which technology leads to the ultimate success, right? If somebody figures out a way to use, retroviruses, or adenoviruses to treat something and cure something, and it's safe and predictable, sure. Right? And I mean, Bluebird with lentiviruses is on a very good way to get somewhere. So, in that case, agnostic.
Yeah, we're very agnostic, but we're thinking about the future. I mean, and what's going to come next.
Right.
Yeah.
You actually brought up a good segue, because it's been a big theme at this conference about pricing. So when we talk about pricing, since this has been a topic of the conference, as I just said, many of these orphan disease developers are looking at very high pricing right now, but likely minimal dosing over time. A lot of these companies are looking at potentially a single dose. Again, let's look at the eye disorders, or maybe one dose every 5 to 7 years. The question's still out there. So is this okay with you from an investment standpoint? Is it a sustainable model?
Oh boy.
Got to throw the zinger in there.
Yeah, and that's a huge linchpin that I think, again, on public market perspective, they get a lot of things wrong. And one thing they often get wrong, especially when it comes to development stage biotech companies, is the expectations for future revenues, right? And so, and obviously reimbursement is going to be an important factor here. I don't have a strong view. I mean, I think it's a huge risk factor. We're watching the Glybera story. We're reading as much as we can in some of the industry rags about, more innovative pricing models. There's a lot of things happening. I think we're all kind of waiting, to see what, these treatment paradigms are going to be really disrupted. And so how do you pay for them? Is it something you pay over time? Is there accountability where if it doesn't work, or they have to get redosed, or how does that work? There's probably a lot of flexibility there. It's coming. I don't have a strong view. I think, it'll be, is it sustainable? I mean, obviously we're going to have to, these are going to be, if the promise pans out, these are truly going to be transformative, disease modifying, curative, amazing, hopefully, and we're going to find some way to get those to patients. Governments will want to do that, patients will demand it, and companies will want to, in our industry will want to do it too. So, but I don't have a strong view on whether it's sustainable. I suspect that that we'll come up with some solution. I don't know, my esteemed colleagues have any better insight into it.
Yeah, there's a fundamental belief from our perspective in, it's sort of why I think it's not just about monogenic, but it needs to be about an incredibly serious disease with very limited or really very poor alternatives out there. And in a lot of the complex diseases, frankly, they're unmet needs, but there are lots of other things going on therapeutically, and so that's why we try and stay away from those types of opportunities. And in the case where you are the only possible life-saving therapy for a disease, we feel like that's going to be super transformative for everyone, and we should be able to make it work. There's no detail in that in those comments, but there's a fundamental belief that we will make that work. Yeah.
So pricing and reimbursement is obviously, I think, the most common debate in the gene therapy space right now, right? I mean, before we didn't really have one-time potential cures that could capture the entire value, in one-time treatment, right? And so that's a key debate, how to pay for that, and there's a bunch of scenarios, right? Could be a large lump sum payment, as for example, Unicure and Glybera tried in Europe, 40 million euros in Germany, or could it be an annuity, while a payer pays every year as long as the drug seemed to be working, or it could be a combination of both, some lump sum plus some annuity, or any other creative, pricing scheme, right? That's yet to be seen. And frankly speaking, I'll be watching Spark Therapeutics, because they will be the pioneer. Chances are that's going to be the first approved gene therapy in the U.S., and they will have to come up with a way to price their drug, and both government and payers have to come up with something. So that's going to be interesting to watch.
And the major gap to bridge, I think, with all these is going to be the amount of data that one has at the time of an approval,
exactly.
and the value that you're trying to ascribe to these therapies that are over a longer term than what you actually have data on. And there's got to be some ways to bridge that gap.
I mean, we invest mostly in companies that have drugs or devices that address unmet medical needs. And what we have seen in most of those cases, if those drugs are approved, eventually the system pays for it, because alternatives are very limited or are very poor. And and in the orphan sector, we have seen the cost of drugs, $300,000-400,000 per year. That has become very much the norm. I hope the companies remain responsible, because at some point, my concern is that the system at some point may start to look at orphan diseases. And I know that every insurance company says that we have very few patients, but they add up. We have not seen that yet, but I just don't want this to be a case like what Clinton was coming down on companies more in the specialty pharma, that they jack up the prices. So I really hope that in the orphan area, I know the companies have to, of course, recoup the drug costs, but I hope they stay responsible on that. But I think that eventually the system will find a model when the drug works and there is need for that. And I think probably for biotech companies also would make sense to have some type of annuity model, because you also don't want just lump sum payment and then it's very choppy. And it also makes sense, because I think for insurance companies it may be very hard to pay $1 million upfront. And what if the patient, for whatever reason, either the drug, the gene therapy is not providing durable effect, or something happens to the patient, or so forth. So I think it kind of makes sense to have that on a divided by 10 years or 5 years. And I guess as we see also more data, we will see maybe it is like a vaccine that we need a boosting every 5 years or every 10 years. We just don't know that yet. So it will be, but I'm sure the system will find a way, because eventually it will be cost saving. If gene therapy does what we think it should do, that eventually cure the patient over the life of the patient, it should be, however you price it, should be cost saving. So,
and reimbursement just has to catch up with that concept.
They just have to be more creative and find a way.
So all of you pretty much mentioned this concept of creative pricing, and I think we could see some interesting times coming up. And with my constant interaction with management teams, a few have suggested, but we're not willing to adopt themselves, is even when you look at the oncology space, and now you have the potential with combination therapy to start lumping on 2-3 $100,000 plus drugs at the same time, show great efficacy, and can the healthcare system sustain that? And some of these management teams have have even suggested that we'll only charge if it works. And I'm like, oh, really? Are you willing to do that? It's like, no. Any management teams in the audience willing to try that? But, I think we're in for some interesting times with the creative pricing strategies.
There's precedent for that. I mean, that is going on now, not in the U.S., but in other geographies. And so,
Yeah, that's good. So stepping back from the post-approval standpoint that we just talked about, if you just take a step back, talk about commercialization challenges. I know, obviously manufacturing has come up, but what concerns you for potential commercialization challenges? When you look at, the strength of a launch or even being able to get to the launch. Amgen, Regeneron had their anti-PCSK9 drugs approved, but then all of a sudden the big hubbub about the yearly costs for these, and now, Express Scripts is turning around. But what concerns you from a commercialization standpoint?
For some of these rare diseases, I feel like a lot of the patients are kind of already, that was another thing that kind of just dawned on me just in this conversation about what is the difference between the 90s and today. Well, we've got incredible connectedness and social media and patient registries and the ability to basically to find a lot of these rare disease patients and basically get them involved in the clinical trial process. And I think in terms of actually launches and things, there'll probably be a lot of patients, or at least awareness among the key opinion leaders and, a good number of the patients. They're, motivated people, and they're finding these treatments. And so, I think that it's really going to come down to just access and providing, the manufacturing and be able to do that. It just seems to me that, whether or not there's any sort of exclusion criteria or things that, that maybe that aren't necessarily within the clinical trial phase 3 setting that would necessarily exclude them, based on certain patient exclusion or inclusion criteria. But in general, I think it really does come down to, companies kind of getting to a plan where they, basically have a manufacturing scale up and kind of everything up ready to go. I think the patients are likely to be there. Again, that's kind of focusing specifically on these relatively small indications where the patients are probably familiar or have even been involved with a lot of the clinical trials, at least the KOLs. They're fairly concentrated. I don't know, maybe I'm missing the sort of the nuances and subtleties in the field, but I don't know if there's any other thoughts.
My biggest concern, and I think the challenge that lies ahead, and I think we'll figure it out, is the commercial capacity on manufacturing. It's, I think certain rare diseases in the eye, for example, there's not a lot of vector you need, and the number of patients is not enormous, so probably, less concerning there, but systemic delivery, or not just systemic, just other modes of delivery where you need quite a bit of vector for adult patients. The commercial capacity today does not exist, and so it needs to be built. People are still figuring out how best to manufacture these vectors. So there's a lot of work to be done ahead there, because especially if you're thinking about some of these trials being some of them, may be single trial to registration, depending on the disease. And so that's not a lot of time, not a lot of lead time to be ready for commercialization. So I think that's the I think if we can figure that out, I agree. I think the patients, you kind of know where they are, and the rest is a bit less of a concern from my perspective.
I mean, on the manufacturing front, I think quality control would be also an issue that is very important. But beyond that, for diseases that there is truly no other treatment available, I think gene therapy will launch well. But I wonder in diseases that there are other treatments available, infusions weekly or whatever it may be. Would patients jump to get a gene therapy? I think the launch may be very slow. That's because, if you have an alternative, even if you have, twice a week or something infusion, would you put yourself at risk of getting a gene therapy? What if something goes wrong? I think there is still that concern in the patient community, and I would think also in the physician community that maybe they pick and choose who they give the gene therapy to.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
That's something that maybe we should just temper our expectations in terms of the initial launch.
Yeah, it's possible that physicians would wait for a larger safety database to emerge over time.
Yeah.
And we certainly see this in other therapeutic areas, not necessarily with regard to gene therapy, but just novel mechanisms or.
Now I think with Spark, let's say it's the congenital blindness disease that I don't think there is any other treatment available for that. So there, I think, obviously the hurdle is lower, but for some of the potentially thalassemia, sickle cell, so forth, we may see a different sort of resistant profile from
just on your comment about waiting to see in case something goes wrong, would you say that you have a baseline nervousness is in typical drug development for maybe a safety issue that comes out later on, which you see sometimes, or do you have an increased level of concern for potential safety issues for gene therapy approaches?
I think for gene therapy would be higher level of concern as compared to
so
regular
it still
drug.
exists.
Yeah, I think definitely. And again, just the fact that also it's a irreversible procedure. It's not something that you just stop the infusion or 2 days later it's gone from your system.
That's true. So it still exists on a higher level, because even back in the day, not to harp on the retroviruses back in the day, but there was underlying concern that these retroviruses could potentially recombine with human endogenous retroviruses and cause a live virus. So you still have the increased concern there.
Yeah, just even the unknown. I mean, how many patients have received gene therapy in all clinical trials? It's still very, very small as compared to, other modalities, antibodies, or, obviously small molecule or any other modality. So.
Looked like you wanted to add something. I don't know if
listen, in my view, manufacturing is by far the biggest hurdle. Nobody right now can manufacture on a commercial scale, and there's a bunch of companies in the audience that would probably push back against the statement, but I don't think anybody right now can manufacture at a commercial scale. Of course, for some of the eye diseases like Spark, where you need 10 to the power of 11 viral vectors, you can actually manufacture that pretty much by hand in a little room, because that's so little drug that you actually need. But for some other diseases where you have systemic infusion and you have 10 to the power of 14 viral vectors, like for example, what Avixis is doing with SMA, you will need commercial scale, obviously, manufacturing, and right now we're in the first inning. In my view, there's several different technologies you could use to manufacture. Some companies have already committed to a specific technology and are building out manufacturing plants. Some other companies have not committed to anything and are observing what the science will bring. But it's an open question which technology is the best in terms of scalability and quality and cost, et cetera, right? So that's going to be interesting to watch. And right now we're not there yet. We will be there soon. I believe this will be figured out the same way manufacturing of monoclonal antibodies was initially difficult and hard, and then over time became very easy and simple and efficient and cheap. But it took time, and with gene therapy manufacturing, it's going to be the same thing. It's going to take time.
A few of those management teams are in the room, especially a couple that I cover. I don't know if we want to start that debate now, but maybe take it out to the playground later.
Let's take it outside. Point if there's, I've said when we started the conversation, I'm not sure experts in the field, I'm not going to have any novel insights, but I do, if there's anything I can offer, it's what your typical, kind of specialist investor may think about these companies trying to get up to speed. And I think this is not just true for gene therapy, but in the CAR T space, and it's probably really underappreciated by your typical, even if it's a specialized healthcare fund in the public markets. We get so enchanted by, some of the early clinical efficacy and obviously safety data, but the potential just therapeutically that we sometimes perhaps give short shrift to the reality of the ultimate commercialization, some of the process steps you don't get credit for, but they're so critical ultimately, and I think there's a little bit of a disconnect right now. Yeah. I don't think people are realizing we're racing towards a lot of these, and especially in the CAR T space, and it'll be really interesting to see how those play out, from the investor sentiment as they come to realize and say, oh wait, you're not curing leukemia this year? I thought you were curing leukemia this year because there's like a lot of manufacturing and scale and things that have to happen. So, so that's one thing, I guess for management in the room, if you're talking with us, it's probably something to really, if you have a competitive advantage in that aspect, or if there's something that's unique, like I think that it probably behoove you to really emphasize that, because I don't think it's well appreciated. That's just my personal view, and other folks may have different views, but.
And that's the case today. Again, the same way I think that the big companies, the big pharmas and biotechs really jumping in and gaining more confidence in this will create a lot of opportunities for entrepreneurs and young companies. So will these investments right now in manufacturing, just the way antibodies were. It was the fact that you could make an antibody back in the day was a huge competitive advantage. I mean, that was your platform, and now it's not so much. And those early investments enabled entrepreneurs and young companies to create a lot of value off of and leveraging not just sort of outsource, but partnered abilities for someone else to leverage all that prior investment and know-how to make an antibody because you had a particular other insight. So I think in hopefully the next generation of companies, there will be sort of turnkey abilities to make something if you have a great idea and some great data on a concept. And I think that should be able to help the industry blossom.
And not only showing that managements can tell you or show you that they can manufacture it, but I think also, and this is a lot of my personal opinion, perception really drives the issue, because if you look at it, and so many of you in the audience have made massive strides in this, Dendreon as an example just killed the concept of autologous. If you had something autologous, you were dead in the eyes of many investors until you can actually prove to them, no, we're not Dendreon. We can do this at a fraction of the cost of goods. So perception has a big, driving aspect to that as well.
Absolutely.
So, okay. Before we maybe go on to our last question, I want to make sure we leave some time for any audience questions. I think we might have some mics. Can't see hands, actually. Okay, great. Got a question in the middle over here.
Wow, how did you see that?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, hi. So I'm from London. It's hard for me to sit here and not respond a little bit to the manufacturing.
Great, yeah.
So take it outside.
No, but well, first off, I think there's a big difference between what Novartis is trying to do with CAR T and the challenges associated with autologous and the volumes they're facing for patient specific versus looking at a product like AAV, which is a biological. Sure, it might be a little bit more complicated than a monoclonal, but you will be able to characterize it in a fairly straightforward way. Unit operations are very similar to mammalian technology. For anybody that paid attention to the Celadon story, we were publicly, doing that deal for them. They were very good about communicating what their plans were on the commercialization side with respect to manufacturing, and I give them a lot of credit. They put a lot of energy, and we were fortunate to be able to work with them and build know-how together to establish a very scalable platform. When you look at it, where they got to was really no different than what monoclonal antibody processes look like today for 2,000 liters. So for us, it's just a matter of who wants to build the facility with us, So it's not a matter of, the capacity is there within, 18, 24 months when somebody puts the money on the table, So it's, for us, it's not a matter of any challenges. Sure, it's not trivial, but it's not difficult to actually accomplish it once the capital's there.
But 18, 24 months, obviously most management teams could be thinking, years out on their Gantt chart, but there clearly would require some forethought and then investment into that to get it ready and register with, the clinical development plan.
And the other dimension to it is my sense is that at least with respect to AAV, there's debate on what the best manufacturing approach really is, and so the 18-24 months assumes exactly what you want to do, and this is the way you're going to go, and you know the purity is going to be where you need it to be, and the quality is going to be exactly what you need it to be. But I think even to get there, right now, there are a couple different bets being made on different approaches that are pretty divergent. I think that adds to a little bit more of the unknown, I think, and the timeline to get to a crystal clear picture as to this is what commercial scale manufacturing of AAV is going to be.
Yeah, there's no doubt there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and I don't want to join the panel discussion, but yeah.
I just wanted to say, I mean, there are several manufacturing approaches right now. It doesn't necessarily mean that one of them will be a winner eventually. Sure. I mean, there's 4 big ones, right? So all 4 of them could be. Yeah. It's just a matter of perfecting them, optimizing them, make them cost efficient and with high quality and reproducibility, right? But the point is we're just not there yet. And in 18 to 24 months, as you mentioned, it might be a completely different story. Yeah. And I agree that it's partially a matter of investing behind it and building it out and making it better. Yeah.
Any other from the audience? Yeah, please, ladies first. Wait for the mic, please.
Yeah, so I've got 2 questions. My first question is, how do you guys think about these types of investments relative to all the other healthcare investments that your firms would be making? You know, is this a 5% of the portfolio type of a thing? You know, these are flyers. And also, what's your, on private investments and public investments, what's your return on investment target?
So, I mean, I can speak from our perspective, which is we're an early stage venture capital firm. Because we spend a lot of time on our companies, sometimes interim management roles, but even without that, we spend a lot of time on our companies. So our most precious asset, in fact, is not so much our money, but it's actually our time. So in our funds, in any given fund, we might make, major investments in sort of 12 companies, and so not a lot. These are concentrated portfolios where you put, 10% of your fund to work, and sometimes more than that in each investment. And gene therapy would be no different for us. And so for us, these are very substantial investments, and we try and avoid and really hardly ever do binary investments. So every single one of the gene therapy efforts that we have done or are currently working on or about to do, they're all sort of pretty big vision stories to build very substantial, hopefully multi-billion-dollar businesses, not sort of a single asset type of plays. And I think to be successful today, at least, you kind of need to do that, actually, and to recruit the kind of talent that you need. It's a big limiting factor today, as far as expertise and talent that can do that as well. And to do that at all, you need substantial financing, substantial visions, and great talent. So they're real investments for us.
Adam, I think yeah.
So what we're trying to do is identify great companies early on, finance them at a fairly early stage, but since we have fairly deep pockets, we're a multi-billion-dollar fund, we can finance the company at a early stage, and then later when they're raising more money, and then even later during an IPO, if the company decides to go public, and then even later when the company decides to have a secondary investment, right? So ideally, we will find a company early on and keep the relationship and the investment going for a multi-year period. That's what we're trying to do with gene therapy, and we've done that with several companies by now. As to your question, what portion of the portfolio, or if there is a target, there's no target. It all depends on opportunities. If there's going to be 5 great, early stage gene therapy companies in the next year, we might invest in all 5, right? In terms of percentage of portfolio. Well, as I mentioned, we run several billion dollars, so it's going to be a fairly small part of the portfolio, right, by definition. But still very important in terms of, we spend our time in there and, try to learn as much as possible and really nurture these companies. So in that case, the approach is fairly similar, actually.
I mean, we have been investing in the gene therapy sector for a number of years now. At any time, we have probably around 60 to 80 companies that we are invested in, and I would say gene therapy companies are probably 10% or less of the portfolio. And, I think in gene therapy still there is some concern with safety, even though, again, we are very data-driven, and as we see the data and, some of the companies' longevity data and so forth, that's obviously very reassuring. But I also think gene therapy, because it's a earlier technology, there is still some sort of correlation is not the right word. Some type of one company may get punished for another company's failure, and I think we have always seen that in biotech, but in gene therapy we probably see it more.
Right.
So it's something that also is another reason that we don't want to have a huge exposure to gene therapy at this juncture. But at the same time, obviously, again, some of them, such as Blue and so, have done wonderful, and we are very happy to be supporting them. So
yeah. Well, I'll make it very brief. I think like Daniel, we're opportunistic, so we're not thesis driven. So it's not like we're out there looking for a basket of gene therapy companies. We're judging each company on its merits. And like Kush, we have a very concentrated portfolio. It's generally only 10 to 15 companies, which is not a lot if you think of the probably 900 small cap public companies worldwide. That's a very small percentage. But but any position we have, and we have two that I can think of off the top of my head, gene therapy comes in our portfolio, none of them are flyers. We all think they're great companies, and what makes them attractive is that, I don't care if it's gene therapy or anything, if you have an opportunity where you can get more of this kind of personalized approach, you have the ability to select patients, you can have the optimize a short or accelerated clinical path where you can demonstrate something meaningful early in clinical development, and you can shave off years on a clinical development plan to get to approval. That's huge. I mean, if that's why, my analyst colleagues, if they're doing their DCF models and you can shave off 5 years on that timeline, that's a huge impact on what that's worth today. And most gene therapy companies kind of fall into that bucket. So they're very attractive opportunities. Now, there's still technical risk and things have to work, but I think the profile of gene therapy companies is actually really compelling. So they don't fall into a flyer bucket for me, but again, every company, I don't care if it's a biologic, small molecule, whatever, we're going to judge it by its own merit. But I think it's an attractive opportunity set.
it's interesting that you think it's a shortened time for, I mean,
well, I just mean
time I mean till launch.
Yeah.
Let's see the regulatory requirement.
Data for Spark was just published a few years ago. I mean, it's definitely not the 10, 12 year we tend to think about.
I would agree.
And,
I would agree.
The promise and potential, I mean, these things can go twice as long and cost twice as much, but I think there's the promise and potential in a gene therapy development program to have an expedited
Another
timeline.
Discussion for the playground.
Sorry.
With that said, we're a little over 2 minutes over time, so I really want to thank the panel and thank the Alliance for putting the panel together. So thank you very much.
Thank you.